I want to talk about unit testing inside of Salesforce and Apex Code. And I'm seeing sort of a common pattern here as I go from company to company. Unit tests seem to be written in more of a system test style. And for example, let's say someone has a trigger and they're trying to test the logic that's in the trigger. So what they'll do is they'll write a unit test that inserts data and then waits for the trigger to execute so that they can test the logic. And I would argue that that's not the right way to do it. Instead, what you should do is take the logic that's in that trigger and put it into a function, or maybe its own class, and then just pass the input into that class. Just create it on the fly and then test the logic that way. Don't rely on like the whole, like if you're gonna do it that way, I would call that a system test, because you're testing the entire system and not just one unit of code. So if you have a bunch of tests that are creating this enormous set of data in a setup, that may be because your code isn't structured in a way that makes it easy to test. Another thing that you can do to make your code easier to test is start using sort of like a dependency injection style, where in your constructors of a class, you will receive an object that is sort of like a data fetcher. So that data fetcher then would be responsible for doing your SOQL queries to get data from the database, which would execute in the real production situation. But when your unit tests run, what you'll do is you'll use the stub API to pass in a fake thing into that constructor, and that thing can just return bogus data. Actually, I'll go this way instead. That way, I mean, you can run your tests and it doesn't actually fetch data. You can just focus on testing the logic. So I'll put a link into the description that has an article that kind of describes how to use this approach. And you know, the dependency injection hasn't really been around all that long. I think it was introduced in like 2017. It's 2019 now, so just a couple years ago. And you probably have a lot of code that could be updated to use dependency injection. Yeah, so that's the tip. Make sure that when you're writing Apex code that you're doing things in small chunks that can be tested independent of the data that's in the system. All right, have fun.